Hey everybody, it's Pooch Van Druten along here with you, and Chris Rabold.
What's going on, everybody?
Hey, how are you guys? This is episode 22. We've really been enjoying doing these, and we thank you for coming and watching. And do tell your friends, let everyone know. We've gained a lot of subscribers, and we're very thankful for that and grateful. But we've kind of stalled on the new subscribers, so tell your friends, tell them to come on down and check us out. It's the Pooch and Rabold show.
Do it.
Do it. What do you want to talk about, Chris?
Let's do band and track today.
Band and track, and how do you manage those things, and also maybe the politics of that too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's not just about the deciding about the, how to negotiate making a playback drum kit work with a live drum kit is its own problem, but also there's the deciding what instruments you can fight for or not fight for in that situation. But let's start off with kind of just your overall philosophy of, when given track and band, what's your thoughts on that? Do you lean to the live? Do you lean to the track? Like, what, speak to that a little bit.
Yep. Ideally, and I feel like the righteous answer here is that the two should live together to make a whole, and you spoke about the politics, and we'll get into some of that. There's a lot of camps that want you to be, usually they want the album, they want it track heavier if you're in pop music or R&B or something like that, hip hop, and they only want a sprinkling of band. Or then you'll get the acts that don't do a lot of track, that have sort of begrudgingly just found themselves in this new era, and they don't really know how much they want that track in there. Really, the way to make it work is we're there to mix all sources, whether it's a band or a track, or it doesn't matter what it is, and we're supposed to put it together as a whole.
That's right.
You know what I mean? I can tell you that my pride and my ego wants to do as much as I can from my creation. You know what I mean? Now, those tracks, depending on what state you get them in, they might become your creation if they're really up to par right off the bat. But I like to feel that I am a little band heavier, but if it's not serving the song, don't do that, Right. So nobody wants to do karaoke. Nobody wants to be a glorified karaoke DJ. We all want to mix, Right. But they should all live together to make the message come across as one. That's sort of my philosophy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, that is the ultimate end of this, is what you're trying to achieve, is just that. I am definitely of the school of wanting to lean to the live as much as I can, and I try to drag acts along with me, like, hey, and give them examples like, hey, check this song out where this is track heavy, and this is the way that I think maybe if we tuck the tracks, it would feel, have more impact live. And there is quite a bit of negotiation, for lack of a better word, with whoever's in charge. So whoever the musical director is, or maybe it's the artist. I have a lot of those discussions in rehearsals, like, hey, come in my room and check out this version and see what you think. And I'll have artists like Jay-Z, for instance, who you would think would want it to be super track heavy, right? Like he wants it to be, sound like the record, which is all hip hop, and it's absolutely not what he wants. What he wants is the other way. He wants it to feel live. And in fact, he hires, there's 9 guys in his band. He wants that live vibe. And when I get an artist like that, that's really awesome. That's what I love, because it's creation, right? So, I mean, what's your experience in that? Have you had those kind of talks with MDs, and how's it gone, and what?
Oh yeah, For sure. When you were mentioning that, what the artist wants, what the vibe is, this or that, I was thinking of earlier this year, which how crazy it is it's June, and this is one of the few gigs I've done this year. But at the Grammys, I was there with Alicia, and I think we just did one song. Yeah, we just did the one song. She was hosting, and it was her new single, which it often is, like an award show kind of thing. And what I love doing, like in that scenario, we had access to all the tracks. We had everything. So before I even said it, the drummer that was there was like, yo, can I get that kick? Like to take the kick from the tracks, put it in his SPD, and he'd play it. Even though that's a sample that he's playing, I love that too. Like I love pulling, I just love pulling anything out of the track. But I got to be honest with you, I understand the argument to keep it in the track because he can miss a hit. He can fuck it up. The machine can this or that.
Totally.
As could the playback rig, but however, he could hit it in the wrong time. I understand. And she wasn't privy to this so much as came in on it, listened to what was going on. Then later, through a sort of circumstances, the kick ended up in the track. And I can't say she's wrong for that, know?
I think that everyone in this day and age, everyone is scared to not have it sound like the record. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like no mistakes. In this world that we live in with auto-tune and, all these kind of things, I think a go-to for an artist is automatically if there's a choice, to make the decision, the safe choice, you know what I mean? To be like, okay. And that sounds like that was an example of that.
It was. Now, I can't say that. Now, given that's her new single at the Grammys, you know what? Play it safe there. I understand.
Sure.
I can't say that later on, and I haven't worked with Alicia at the time. So we have a cordial, nice relationship, but not nearly as deep as I have with some of my clients. I can't say that later in the year or whenever that we couldn't have been like, can we play this? Are you cool with that? And then come tour time, it might not have been okay. And that sort of speaks to something you'll find a lot is if there's a lot of track to where the track could stand on its own, which is a nightmare to admit.
It is. That's the 100% the wrong way. By the way, if you're a musician watching this or an MD watching this, 100% wrong way to do this is to have the record playing and a band playing over the top of it.
Yeah, there should be a scroll across the bottom of the screen right now that says, we absolutely feel the band and the track should live together. Don't flam, don't put in good. But the fact of the matter is it does happen a lot. And a lot of times what you'll find is you'll find an act where the principal artist, the he or the she, a lot of times is only hearing that track in their ears. So you can't pull anything out of it because that's all they're listening to. The band is, even if the MD has done everything in their power to make the band really matter, they're just kind of a prop for the artist. So that's where this is a multifaceted topic, is how much can you get away with pulling out. So sometimes you can't. So for instance, what I did in the situation of the Alicia thing, the kick was loud. It was a sampled kick and it was loud and it mattered.
Right.
We didn't take my rig into there, so for the show it really didn't matter, but when we were making mixes and we were sending them to other artists that were going to sit in and we're feeling it out, I actually side chained. The drummer still wanted to hit something, so he was hitting his live kick, and I just side chained it and ducked it, because to be honest with you, the kick that mattered in the song was the program kick in the track, Totally. So I'll make those decisions, and so I guess you could probably speak to that too, particularly when you start getting into with drums is the hardest because of the flam. Other sections of the musicality of the song, you've got a little more leeway, but man, when you've got the big swampy pad in the track and the guy doubling it too, like what do you do in those situations?
It's tough, man. It really is. But in all places like that, especially impulse things like drums, you can't have both. So you got to decide which is going to survive. And if it's an important piece, like what you're talking about with, hey, this kick drum sound is important, you can't have it in two places, certainly with a live guy versus a track, because you're going to get all kinds of timing problems. It's not even so much about the two different sounds of those things.
Not at all. It's the sonic, it's the phase relationship.
Phase relationship and the flamming that happens live versus the track. So, and unfortunately, I've been forced to have it that way. You know what I mean? So
a lot.
So then the only other decision is to eliminate the live one, right? At that point, if they are absolutely sold on the fact that they got to have that kick drum or got to have that snare drum that's in the playback, then the only solution to keep it from sounding shitty and flammy is to lose the live guy, which sucks. But I mean, that is really the only solution around those kind of things. So I think in this topic, at least for me, it's not even really a sound thing. It's about the negotiation that has to happen to decide what goes. Really, it's like which is going to go? Is it going to be the guitar that's on the track, or is it the live guy? One of them's got to go, and the trying to put them together is what I'm talking about when I've had a lot of situations where I've actually asked MDs to come and listen, because I want to show them what happens when you have that live guitar and you have the guitar that's in the track. What happens to that? It gets so schmeary and not even defined anymore. And most of the time, not all the time, most of the time, they hear what you're talking about and it makes the decision for them.
Yep.
You know, you've experienced that as well? Same kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, and sometimes there again, it goes back into if there's a principal that's only listening to those things, you're stuck. But then it's on you to make that decision on how you deal with it. But to answer your question, yes, many, many, many times. If I've got an MD or an artist and an MD that will work with me, we'll listen and make that. That's again, there's that scrolling thing again. The way to do it is that's the way to do it.
Now, to get around what you're talking about, where, you know, the artist, the only thing that they're listening to, the solution that I've done in the past, and it's not an easy solution and it's not a great solution, which is to take every stem that you can get a hold of and break it all out so that it's all apart in a mass amount of playback. So now normally when you're talking about maybe, you know, 12 inputs of playback, so you have, you know, drums and bass and guitar and keys and whatever, and you work within the parameters, and I've spent a lot of time with artists making sure that those stems are right. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. But when I'm talking about an artist that wants to have all the recorded things, wants it to be the record in their ears, then you have to break things out so that I get the opportunity to pull that kick drum out and use the live one.
Right.
You know, if it's part of a stem, then I don't have that ability. So in my experience, and you tell me because you've had a lot of this experience too, that was really the only way I could get around that kind of shit. Was it's all the stems are from the recording guy. They're the record. So when you put all of those stems together, when the monitor engineer takes 32 inputs worth of playback and puts all of those faders to zero, it basically becomes the record. And then he can send that to him or her. But then what that allows me on the front part of that is to decide about things that should be live versus whatever. It makes me the decision maker. Yep. Have you been in that kind of experience? Or?
Yeah. And I think that too, again, what's the ultimate answer is to stem it out as much as you can and to make sure nothing's fighting. If you can do both of those, you're in really good shape. But
I think we should point out, like, I hear about guys all the time that, there's 72 inputs of playback, you know. Mm-hmm. There's a point where that gets dumb, right? Yeah, like you should be combining things to bring down the inputs of that. And I only go to a situation where I use 32 inputs, let's say, of playback in those special situations where the artist needs to hear the record and I need to make decisions about what not to have at front of house. That's really the only time when I say to a playback guy, hey, I think we can use 32 inputs. The rest of the time, I literally am saying to somebody like, let's do it, maybe 10 to 12, maybe 14 inputs,
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. How about you? I mean, what is it for you?
Yeah. I was trying to think of what's the most I've ever made it to. I think including like click, slate, time code, and that sort of stuff, I think 24 channels total of playback is the most I've ever made it to.
I made it to 32 once, and I was like, "This is ridiculous."
Yeah, Yeah, because I'm with you. I mean, I'd rather, and if you do it right, you don't have to break it out quite that heavily. But
in that particular instance, for me, it was because it was how the artist's engineer or assistant or whoever built the stems, that's how they broke it out. So I could have then took those 32 inputs of stuff and then made my own stems from it. But I was afraid that if I started doing that, then the monitor engineer wouldn't have any options
right
for her. So anyway, that you have to figure that out. There's a line that you walk there.
And it looks different. And again, let's just assume it's a situation where you have a say. And I realize a lot of people we're talking to here, your tracks are either a 2-track or at most it's drums left, right, music left, right, vocals left, right. We know that. I get
Linkin Park, when they first started, was an iPod, and it was a left side click and right side mono playback of all their stuff.
Yeah. So we both have, Pooch and I have been there. I know what those look like. And even that Alicia thing I was talking about, man, we did that super bare bones. Like it was not many channels of playback on that. So separating it out is definitely the way to go, but it does get stupid at a certain point. It just gets to be too much, Now I've had instances where, and we've all run into this, where you do have the drums and it's everything. It's a full, and I remember when I made it to track, I think I had done, so again, you got to remember, I'm coming from the rock jam band sort of side of things. And just clubs and everything else. And so, I mean, I think I did an MTV2 hip hop show when somehow I did something like that before. That was my first foray, but that was hip hop. So it was basically just like, and it wasn't like, a lot of hip hop now, like you did Travis Scott. Did you guys have a band at all for that?
No, it was the hardest 4 inputs I ever had.
Okay. Well, how a lot of them now will have that's what you told me that. A lot of them now will have drums and a keyboard player or something. Right. Like this was that. This was Travis Scott. It was just all. So I did track, but it wasn't competing against anything. Where I'm going with this is the next time I encountered it was walking into Lady Gaga rehearsals in 2010 while she's like the biggest star in the world.
Right.
And I'm walking in going, what? And that's when I made it to track. And man, at the beginning it was rough because I didn't know how to marry, and everything was on top of each other. It was very sloppy. It was very much like just throw the whole kitchen sink at them. It was a gigantic band that had a full-time harp player and a violin. I mean, it was ridiculous, Right. So I encountered all this stuff and it just sounded fucking horrible to me. And it was funny though, but this is kind of going on a tangent here. At first, I spent like the first day or two going, well, what do they want of me? How do you do this? What is this? And the MD kind of got on me. Basically, he was just like, man, I'm not digging this, And I remember he said, and it pissed me off, but I heard the shred of truth in it. And what I did was I went, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to give them I'm going to mix like me, and I'm going to work this track in around it. So this was kind of the opposite of what I've said. Now that I know what I know, I would have handled it all totally different. The way I made it work and what made them super happy was I made this aggressive, loud, punchy ass live sound coupled with their tracks, and they weren't used to that. So they were like, whoa, what am I hearing? As time went on, And while that MD was still there and the track still stayed kind of just the whole kitchen sink, I then found other ways to do it. Whereas now I probably would have been keeping the track kick somehow and losing the live. What I would do was, and I wasn't triggering this with anything, but I had C6s on all the tracks. And there was a lot. There was probably 24. And I would do things like, and it wasn't sidechained to anything, but they would literally just like duck the shit out of the low end. Yeah. So I would get my kick, at least it's still flamming, as you know, in the mid-range and the top, but there was elements of me that could come out. And so that's where you start developing those tricks, or, you know, the keyboard stuff, where I also had a keyboard player with 8 keyboards. I would be just ducking the shit out of the low mids or something, you know.
Totally.
I was just carved, and it's unnecessary. I now realize how unnecessary that is, but in those situations, it's a way to get by, you know.
It is, you know, like we've talked about in all of these videos, you do what you have to do, right? So when you're given, you know, when you're given lemons, you make lemonade. You know, I hate that saying, but it's what you do, right? Like, you know, it's funny that you say that, even with that Jay-Z thing, you know, and Jay wanting it more live, the stems that I was given are, you know, it was drums, but it was all of them in a left and a right, including like 808s, you know, and, you know, big low end hits and all this kind of stuff that the drummer was also playing pads of. So it was crazy. And I did exactly how you handled it. Literally there was a C6 on every stem.
Yep.
And it wasn't safed. It changed drastically from song to song, not only in EQ, but how it was going to compress. And I would do exactly what you did, which was, you know, hey, if there's a part of this song that's got a huge 808 in the track, I'm going to let the C6 just squash the hell out of it. And the live C6 or the live 808 that he's hitting on the pad is going to be the thing, you know? Yeah, man. I mean, you do what you got to do, right? When you're handed, you know, 4 tracks of stuff, that's a way around it. Is there other things that you do, you know, to get around that?
Well, I was trying. I bet I'll think of some other tricks, so to speak. I mean, first of all, I will. Conversely, if there's a mission critical track, and there's a player doing something that's extraneous, that's really just to justify him being on stage, I'll duck the shit out of him. You know, like whatever needs to do, particularly if that's the thing that needs to matter. And, you know,
I'm totally the guy that's just like, you suck, you're done. Mute.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Whatever it takes to clean it up. I mean, forget about it. You know, but some things I'll do, you know, I was thinking to myself, you know, the track layout, once you get past 2 tracks or drums, music, vocals, and it gets larger, and let's say you have some say in it, it looks different everywhere. Like all of my acts will look different. Like on Bruno, we started doing this thing. When I got there was just keys, and as one of the sub down things. And then I separated it out to where we now have keys 1 and keys 2. Keys 1 are for bass level, texture, pads, organ, like stuff like that. Keys 2 are signature sounds. Keys 2 is something that if they can only hear 3 sounds to identify the song, that's where it goes. And if you remember on that Bieber thing, there was something, God, I can't remember how we did it, but we separated something out where there was like a vocal effects stem, like a lot of times effects is one. And I was like, on that one, I was like, you know what, that's not enough. We need effects, and then we need vocal effects.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't do that on Bruno. Right. I have the effect, you know, and on Bruno, I have this thing called the aux. I call it the bus. It's not a bus or it's track, but the aux. And it's like anything
that doesn't fit in the other stems.
Yeah.
It's going in that.
It's going in that, and it's usually living by itself. Yeah. Like I'll tell you right now, when we start Uptown Funk, it's coming down the aux, and it's fucking jacked, and I've got a boost at like 1.6, so there's no way you can't hear it, you know?
Because it's a thing. Yeah.
It's a thing, and you learn your act, and you figure out like, you know, I imagine if I had a bunch of track guitars, I'd want to separate those because that's the hardest is how do you even, you know, you've got 3 guitars and a bus. That's just a ball of shit right there.
Oh
You know?
man, it's hard. Yeah. So what I do very similar to what you do, but if I'm given the chance to kind of break out stems like what we're talking about, you know, into let's say 8 inputs of stuff, I start thinking about things EQ wise for me. So I say, okay, this stem is all low end information stuff. This stem is, um,
Oh, that's cool.
do you know what I mean? So it's
I've
like,
never even thought about doing that. That's real. I get that.
so in other words, I'll have maybe 2 stems that are drums, but I take all the kick drums and the 808s and all that stuff I try to scooch them to the low end
Mm-hmm.
stem, and then you know, and then I might have like a sparkly bits in regards to the, you know, the keyboard parts and, you know, all those kind of thing. Anything that has that kind of information in it, I put it in that stem so that the processing is specific to sparkly things, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense, on
It
that
does.
bus. So rather than, for me, if I'm given a low amount of stems to work in, I actually think in the EQ way rather than the instrument way. You know, I mean, you know, keyboards are with keyboards and, you know, that kind of stuff, but I do really like, if there's a guitar that's really super high endy and a keyboard that's super high endy, it goes into my sparkly bits uh you know, thing, and they're 2 different instruments. So I really do, when I'm given a low amount of stems, I think of it that way in EQ, if that makes sense.
Do you know the name Michael Brower?
I do.
Yeah, you know, that's like his, similar, his multi-bus process, the way he does his albums, where he buses things kind of in frequency grouping. Um,
Yes.
that's really smart. I never really thought to do that. Yeah, because when I was talking about ducking that kick drum, well, there was some like cool drum. I mean, I may have been ducking from not like 80 and down. I might have been like 160 and down. And
Totally.
so there was some drum stuff that's getting lost while I'm doing that. So if you can move that stuff around, yeah, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah. It's just something, I actually started doing it with Linkin Park, because there was this evolution that happened with Linkin Park. Before I was there, it was literally a, you know, left side click, right side mono mix
Mhm.
of that. When I showed up, I think they were doing, God, I can't remember, but it was small. It was like maybe 4 inputs,
Right.
you know, of playback. Like they had broken it from the iPod thing into 4 inputs. And then when I showed up, there was a new playback guy as well. His name was Dylan Eli, and
Yes.
we had a big powwow and said, okay, what can we do to make this better and give us more control?
Mhm.
And it just kind of fell in that way for me. Like I was like, okay, I need a stem that's low end information. I need a stem that has sparkly bits. I need a stem that has the music. I think I had one that was like low end stuff. So any bass guitars or 808 information was in that stem. And then there was loops,
Yeah.
anything that's got loops. Then there was music,
Hmm.
uh, and then a music sparkle. You know what I mean? So there were 2 places where I could go, to put playback information. And that's another thing is like, sometimes I will choose an opposite stem if I know that I'm going to need control of an instrument that's against another instrument, if that
Yep.
makes sense.
No, it totally does.
Yeah. So, as you're building the stems and breaking this stuff out, I'm thinking in my own head going, I know that probably in some situations that keyboard is going to be difficult to manage. I
Hmm.
want separate control of that keyboard versus it being in a stem with all the rest of them.
Yep. Totally.
So you know, those are all like thought processes, if you're allowed the time.
If you're allowed, and again, we
Yeah,
realize a lot of people are just getting what they're getting. And
totally get
you know
it.
what? If you're at a club and it shows up, and somebody shows up and they're like, "Here's our playback, music, drums, music,
Yep.
vocals, or whatever," just what it sucks is it changes song to song, but Man, just grab the EQ and dig holes where you need it to
Do
make
that. And I almost always, if I'm given that situation where I show up where the playback is, two or four tracks, everything gets a C6 and
Yeah.
it is in constant flux, kind of trying to fix what's happening.
Yeah.
Just to try to get more of a linear thing, because always it's not just that all those things are together in playback, it's that they're usually mixed poorly.
That's true, because stems means a lot of different things. If you get stems from someone, it could mean all of the raw tracks bus together, not at all mixed. You know what I mean? It could mean everything going. It just stems. It's tough. Stems can mean a lot of different things, and it's rarely done by the engineer, unless they have like a staff engineer. It's a lot of times an assistant who just has all of these stems they got to do, and they're just banging them out late at night.
Yeah.
And then particularly if you need visuals.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, hopefully you have a good relationship with that person. Sometimes they're on the road with you nowadays, but and you've got to call them up like, hey man. And sometimes it's not a hey man. Sometimes it's like, who is this person? It's this nameless person. And here you're this front of house guy they don't know. They know nothing about live sound, and they've got to go back and make some stem for you. Like, they're not super stoked to be doing it,
No, they're not. And the hardest part about stems that are coming from the record is all of that, who knows who's doing it and whatever. It's at the end of the night after everyone's left. But the real deal nowadays for me is when you start breaking out stems out of a record, now you're not getting the bus processing that's happening on those things.
And that's what I mean. So like stems could be really the way I'd like to have it done, and people disagree on this. Process it through whatever their bus is, and then I like the stereo bus too. Like, I want it sent, because that way it adds together.
Totally get it.
And some people don't want that last bit of processing, and I'm like, no, that matters, particularly if there's any sort of like normalizing or leveling or compressing, because it's going to pull it up. Otherwise, you're just getting, it's not going to sound, it will never sound the same to what.
Yeah, that's right. So if I can have a conversation with that guy, I say exactly the same thing that you just said, which is, hey man, when you're making these stems, I need it to go through your master bus. I don't want you to make a stem of that keyboard bus, which has its own processing on it, and bounce it from just that. I want the final output of it. And I've actually had a friend of mine go, it was like an aha moment for him when I said that. But even at that, it's the effect of the master bus compression is happening because of all of it, not just because of that one stem that you're sending through.
And that path, so it might not, even if you send it through it, it's not moving the same way.
It may not move in the same way. So any way you look at it, when you break things out in stems, the combination of them coming back together, I still have to do stuff. It's not like you put everything up at 0, whatever, and all of a sudden it's the record. Really, it's close, but it's not. It doesn't have all of that processing. So you just need to be aware of that.
Right. I'm thinking as you're talking here about now suddenly, of course, there's a million things coming to mind, and I was thinking, one of the things that's really cool is when you have a relationship with the programmer or the Pro Tools guy, and you get some new tracks, and they know you're on the same page. They'll be like, hey man, I sent this down, I think about with the Bruno thing. I sent this down keys 1, I put this on keys 2, I put this on aux. Is that where you want? And it's so great to be in concert with one another. We've taken it a step further in that camp, and I now do this everywhere. Whereas I try to have so that -10 on their end is -10 on my end, with ideally 0 gain. But sometimes I've found, like in the Bruno rig, which are some Lynx Auroras is what we're coming out. We're still going analog on that. That's a whole other conversation. But we might do something different next time. But I've found that -10, a full on to the dot, -10 dB full scale, out of that into the Digico stage rack, I would have to apply 3 dB. And that's another thing too to talk about with gain structure with tracks. I don't know about you. I'm assuming I do here. But you know, my thing is those this is super important. Those tracks are all gain the same.
Oh,
So,
absolutely,
of
100%.
course, but you know what, man? You'd be surprised how many people don't do this. And that's when I started to say it. I'm like, I know you do this. If all of your tracks are not gain the same, you're all you the programmer, the
You've got
artist,
no reference.
there's no reference.
reference. Yeah.
So when you see somebody that has that different, then you're not speaking the same. You're not talking about the same song. You're not talking about the same tracks because they're relative to nothing.
Right.
So I think that's an important point to make there is have that. But we've even done it where on the Bruno thing, and of course this is a standard, and you know rules are made to be broken. So sometimes things change. But by default, I'll have when we get new tracks, the drums, whatever the loudest part in the drums are. And in that one, we have like drums left, right, perk left, right, and nothing flams in that. We'll have snares and claps. I'm okay with that, but no kicks or anything. But so that's as far as we go in there. But the Erston Hurwitz is our programmer there. Fantastic. He knows to have those drums hit at -10. So like we have it standardized, so it's not this big mystery when tracks come in.
Totally.
What are we going to do with them? So he knows to take the drum tracks, trim them to where the loudest hit is at -10, and then everything else gets trimmed appropriately. And I tell you, 9 times out of 10, it is a just push it up, and then we'll fine tune from there.
Of course.
If we have a dance break or it's something all by itself, that thing's probably close to 0 because it's the whole song. So. Anyway, something to note.
No, that's a great example. Yeah, and it's always something that we should say, you know, when we're talking about making adjustments, the 0 point or the point, you have no reference if you don't gain all of your things the same. Like I get that you look at something, you get some tracks together, you look at something and something is way low and it needs to come up. I don't gain that channel. I go back to the source, just like you would with an instrument. So go back to the playback guy and be like, okay, that one little thing, we got to fix that thing because and then I have that reference. Like everything is gained the same. So I now know that when he fixes it, how much he needs to go to fix it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's conversation with the playback guy as opposed to, you know, you doing combat audio and like trying to get it. Now, you know, I get it, guys. Like if you're in a situation where it is what it is and you're just getting whatever. I mean, I have literally been in combat audio situation where it's like, you know, I'm you know, playback, not playback. Oh my God, this is too loud, and reaching for gains and doing whatever it takes, you know, to get through it. But if I'm going to have to do it again after one show, we're having a discussion.
Yep. Yeah. I make part of my, in rehearsals, if it's a long rehearsal period, a big thing, and this is like knowing how to read the room, knowing when is the right time to talk. Like if the artist is there, do they want to hear this yapping? Are you in their ears? Not, but I mean, it is such a routine part of my world. When we get some new tracks, we'll put it where we want it. We'll check it. We'll make sure it's good. And then as we start rehearsing, for me to just lean in there real quick, and let's say I'm talking about my buddy Erston with Bruno or something, like, hey, Erston, can you give me 2 on the ARP on keys 2? Boom.
Totally.
Just find that opening in conversation and say it. And I can tell you too, on a political level, that can kind of be a good look because it's it shows you mean business. It shows
this guy's paying attention. He's, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Now the other move might be to make those notes go back later if it's a more, but I, by and large,
I don't do that. I am the same as you. In fact, I take it a step further sometimes and walk out of my room in rehearsals and walk into the main room and walk over to the playback guy for that very reason, to make a statement like, hey, I'm walking over here and there's something that really needs to change.
Yeah.
You know, later on, the MD or the artist will always come to me and say, hey, man, I saw you like walk in there and do it. And that opens up the right kind of discussions.
Yep. And like, and I'll always have the playback person, again, this is on a tour, not a throw.
We're talking about when we have long rehearsals and we have the time. I mean, guys, we know we're blessed and we're grateful for that.
Totally.
We're just trying to give you, when you have that opportunity, this is maybe how you should work in your workflow.
Yep. And if that person can't have near fields at their workstation, I often don't even times require that. But I will ask that they always have some means of playing back where I don't have to walk in with ears or cans, because I know the sound I'm looking for. And I can take a less than stellar representation of that through some little Fostex.
Right.
Go in, like we're sitting there, we're looking at the track, and I'm going, no, that one, play that. Okay, play it in context. Okay, yeah, that's the one I want, up 3.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
Anyway, what about, you know what, this is a good segue. What about if you're going to get tracks with anything on it, a lot of times it's going to be vocals. It's going to be background vocals. And I know people have asked a lot about that. We should probably talk about how we handle track vocals, live background vocals. Let's do backgrounds. Let's do that. I guess we could get into leads too, but what do you have a general philosophy on that, or?
Man, it's funny. Unless the band is amazing, I tend to think just the opposite about playback of vocal versus live, because the vocal, if it's a big lush background vocal stuff, you just can't get that out of the 3 guys that are singing,
that are singing, and are singing on open vocal microphone in a live environment.
Everything else in it, and all that stuff. Now, I will say, like, I did Michael McDonald, and all of the band, including the drummer, sang background vocals, and there wasn't any playback, so I didn't even have the option. It's the band was playing live, so I didn't have an option. But I will tell you, if I had had the option, I would have kept the live ones, because they were just stellar. I mean, 6 really good musicians singing is a better option if you have it. But that's almost, that is not the norm. That is totally like, the 1%. So I and man, I've been there. I've been in a couple situations where, people come in and listen to it, or they're on my ass about board mixes of like, more of the live background vocals, and I always just go, man, it makes me want to be the guy that like solos that track up and ships it to him.
I know.
But I don't do that, because that's the wrong thing to do, guys. You don't want to. In fact, this is a great time for a story, but I'm not going to tell you what artist it is, or what front of house guy it was, or any of that kind of stuff. But I've heard stories of guys doing that kind of stuff, like shipping something that sounds horrible to the artist or to the musical director. And guys, I'm here to tell you that is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Any time you hand anything to anybody, management, MD, artist, be proud of it. Make sure that it's stellar, and make sure that it's killer, because that will be your demise quicker than you know.
Yep.
And so I've heard
you're handing them your reference. You're handing them your work.
Even if you're trying to make a point,
it won't.
No, it won't. They will. What they will hear first is, "Boy, this sounds like shit." I mean, that's our sound guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you're handing them a CD with the purpose of saying, "Hey, boy, this background vocal is not that great, dude. You need to. It's higher in the mix so you can hear that it's bad." They won't hear that. What they'll hear is the mix of it, and say, "Well, this sounds shitty. Why is this guy our sound guy?"
Yep.
So, man, don't ever do that. And it happens all the time. Big gigs have been lost.
Yeah. Now, conversely, if you have the good, and this is what you were talking about earlier on in the video, if you have a good relationship with the MD or someone, you can pull them aside by actively.
Here's a pair of headphones.
Here's a pair of headphones, or
check this out. Yeah.
Or I'm just going to quickly push it, or where it's a fleeting moment in time.
Yeah. Don't ever record that. But,
don't do that.
But solo it up and say, "Hey, dude, check this out," to a guy that you trust, that he's not going to anybody else. you know, and has power to change it, you know, so like the MD or whatever. But you have to have a relationship with that dude in order to do that, right? Like you can't, you know, it could be you're showing up on a gig and you don't have that relationship with the MD. I am not going to do that in the first 2 days of rehearsal.
No.
Not not
No.
a chance. So again, it's like you said, you know, reading the room. So I've talked a lot about it. Sorry. You tell us what's your score on background vocals and how you handle it.
No, honestly, I could say just see what Pooch just said. I mean, what I see in my, well, first of all, yeah, it's so rare that you have vocalists that are going to beat the track, let alone compete with it. And even if they can, we talk about noise floor and how much you can get away with your vocals. I can't put 8 compressors on them, and I can't do that sound and amplify it without all hell breaking loose on the quietest of stages
and destroying your mix because of it. Yeah.
Right. And so, and oftentimes too, if it's like a breathy part like that, a breathy part doesn't come with a lot of vocal push. Like they're going to have to inherently sing lower. So there's something that it's just going to be a mess. So I too lean heavily. The way I think of it is I'll lean on the backgrounds, the track, and then to keep us honest, I like to say I want the live vocals to bubble up every so often, just to keep it honest. You know, I don't want full track. The other thing too to keep in mind is a lot of time with those background vocals, you know, the backgrounds are often coming in on the hook.
Yeah.
So that's the hook. And that if it's an audience, it's a big song. I mean, that's what they know is the hook. So I do want it to sound as pristine and as wonderful as it can. And I don't care if that part sounds a little tracky. I kind of feel like it's supposed to, you know. And a lot of times what we're calling backgrounds might have the lead buried in there too. You know, there's a lot of artists that like they technically they don't sing the track, but the choruses they do. You know what I mean? Where it's not just backgrounds. There's a lead in there also. So
totally, man. That happens all the time.
Yeah, and when the artist knows that, a lot of times they kind of take a breather on the.
They do, don't they? Yeah, I've experienced that a lot. Yeah.
I've even told vocalists this when they're not sure how they want to handle tracks or everything. I'll be like, and I just go on to my own experience, which has been with a number of different acts that have done this. I'm like, you know what? Particularly if they're active and they're moving a lot, I'm like, use that chorus to kind of take a breather. Let's put your lead in there. I'll keep you honest. I'll keep you in there enough, but maybe that's your chance to catch your breath.
Catch your breath. Yeah, that's great. That's good stuff. You know, the other thing that I wanted to say too, specifically about backgrounds, when I don't have playback, when I have 6 open microphones, I don't let those 6 open microphones sit there in my mix all the time. I learn when they sing during rehearsals, like when are the parts, when are they singing, and literally I'll put it on a control group, all 6 microphones on a control group, and those are never open unless all 6 are singing, if you know what I mean. So so I do spend a bunch of time making sure that when I'm in that situation with a lot of open microphones, they're not just sitting there in my mix. That's the quickest way to destroy your mix. It's just something I thought about as you were talking.
Yeah, that is for sure. I'll have them both. I'll have a Neve 5045 or a PSE or something over them and automated.
Yes.
In other words, they're still muted even with that other layer of protection in there. Just because that is such a quick way to trash your mix is to leave those excuse me, is to leave those open.
Kind of on the tail end of this, and I know that we've talked about, like, you know, the processing, lead vocal processing, but let's throw leads in there too, because we've both worked for artists where there is a ghost vocal. And I'm sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you what artists have, you know, recorded vocal and what don't. But I mean, you know, come on, people know it these days. You know, what was that whole controversy with Britney Spears, right? You know, everybody talking about how every song was a recorded track, and then she would just talk in between songs like if nothing was live. That's the extreme. But I think that there are a lot of artists that utilize a ghost vocal that may not be them. In fact, you know, I had an artist where I was literally making a decision, spontaneous decision, um, as to are they going to sing or aren't they going to sing,
That's
and
the worst.
deciding, that is the worst, isn't
That
it?
sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do you handle that? How do you, that's the worst case scenario where you're saying, okay, I don't think they're going to sing. I'm going to put the ghost vocal in, but in a regular way with an artist that maybe has kind of a lead vocal track that they like us to use to kind of sweeten their live vocal.
Mhm.
What's your thoughts on that? And do you use it sparingly, or is it loud and proud?
Well, most of the times when I have a lead vocal track, it's the vocal. It's not. Now, the modern, and this is a big thing in hip hop, where the guys are essentially just rapping over themselves, and that's almost kind of, even though it sounds fucking horrible,
Yes.
kind of like,
But that's the sound of it
that's
that
the
people
sound.
want. Yes, I know.
That has become a sound. And that's one where you're kind of okay because you don't have to, you get to choose what the balance is, but it's not like where you're live, track, live, track. So if that's the case, just roll with it, do your best. That's a sound. But usually when it's me, the acts that I've worked with, it's just the live track is there to fully take over in the moment. And I can tell you, who I consider, I too sworn to secrecy on, a number of different levels, number of different acts. What are we saying with every act?
Yeah.
The best vocalist I feel I've ever worked with, she used track vocal heavily. And she could have nailed those parts, but she did it because she is so obsessed with perfection. If she knew that during that part she was going to be doing some sort of dance move that could potentially take away from what her vocal output would be, she dropped in track there. And so that was an example, though, of doing it the right way, where we cut all those, it wasn't the studio vocal. We cut all those vocals with her mic,
That's a really important thing, guys.
Yes.
I've done this a bunch of times myself. Don't use the recorded vocal from the record. It's never going to match and it's never going to sound good.
No.
If you have to use a recorded vocal, ask the artist to re-sing it.
Yep. Have them re-sing it. And I've had people that are like, turn the side fills off. Let's make it quiet. I've had people that are like, leave it on. Let's make it part of the thing. Like, there's so many different ways to do it. But yeah, track with that vocal if you can. If you are using the lead vocal from the album, you're busted. You're busted.
Totally busted.
They're busted.
Nothing you can do to make it sound different. People already know. It's not only the sound of it, it's that the fans that have heard that record hundreds of thousands of times can actually spot the sound of that vocal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's an interesting thing. On one of those, one of the instances where I had this amazing vocalist, but she used a lot of track. I mean, that was the whole thing coming in there. Is like, you got to get her mutes right, and you got to know all the delays.
Right.
And so the mutes were, and I just had to learn them when she sang track, because the deal with this artist, though, this was interesting. She didn't start lip syncing when the track came on. She kept going. Only she knew it was track, and she trusted that everyone had the mutes right, so she would sing like an out-of-breath aerobics instructor.
Wow.
So God forbid that thing came through the PA, it would have been this huffing, puffing, normal person. So what it was is I had to learn where all the mutes were, and I made up all these spreadsheets. And I can't remember, I think I had it where it was highlighted, it meant track or whatever. And so I sat there the whole show with those faders next to one another, and I just muted and unmuted and muted and unmuted.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a fucking nightmare. But it sounded amazing because both vocals sounded amazing, but it was a lot of pressure. So what they do now, and what I see a lot of acts doing, is they'll have, with the lead vocal, they'll have a tone, whether it's just a tone or noise or something, and it precedes it ever so slightly, so that when the track vocal plays, the guys at front of house or monitors, wherever, are taking that tone, they're keying a ducker or a compressor on the lead, and away it goes. And I know with that act now, that's how it's done. So it's all essentially, they don't have to worry about doing it anymore, you know?
I've tried that and didn't have much success. So
You dig it?
no, mainly because it was an artist that was in front of the PA almost 80% of the time. So the threshold of the ducker would get triggered sometimes when it wasn't supposed to be, you know, so you'd have misfires.
Got it.
And there's nothing worse than having the lead vocal and the recorded vocal at equal volumes when the ducker screws up, you know?
Right.
So I don't know, maybe it's a control thing too. Like for me, I'm like, you know, I don't trust that fucking device to do that, you know?
Right.
So,
Right.
but you know, and in that situation, I was playing whack-a-mole in, you know.
Yeah. I've actually never done it. When the last time I had to do, I mean, I just haven't been in a situation where I've needed to, but I know that now that's kind of the sign of the times. That's the way that most people are doing it.
There are a lot of people doing it.
They've got that tone that's triggering it. But the way to do it is I do try to make them match as closely as possible. They usually have the exact same plugins, the exact same whatever.
Yep.
They're the same, and it needs to be. They have all the same effects, you know.
Yep.
So
yeah. Cool. Well, I think that is really good. I think talking about all of this playback versus live in all of these situations, we hope has been helpful to you guys. It's you know, it's a tough thing, playback versus live, and making the decisions to make all of that work are based upon the situation that you're in. You know, if you are forced, which I think probably 80% of you out there that are watching this are forced to use, you know, a 2-track, then really kind of the only way to fix it is what we talked about, a dynamic compressor, making snapshots that do all kinds of EQ digs, to force the live stuff to work with that. And it's not the most optimum thing, but I got to tell you, I've made it work before and it can be done. Anyway, hope you guys got a lot out of that. Any last words there, Chris?
No, I can say if you're someone listening or you looked at this video and you're like, track, I don't do that. I don't need track. I don't think either of us in a million years ever saw this coming.
Nope.
And I'll just say this. I've got a buddy of mine that's scared of flying. He's one of the biggest monitor engineers in the world. He's scared of flying, so what he's done is he's gotten to where he does like the little flight simulators on his computer. He sits by the window. He knows everything there is to know about planes. I hate track. Therefore, I have learned everything there is to learn about, and I feel so incredibly confident with my process because I hate it. So if you think it's not part of your world, keep an open mind. It very well could be, particularly the way that music is going now. So.
It's absolutely. I mean, you know, who would have thought that a rock band that was 2 guitar players, a bass player, and a drummer would be using playback? But they are. That is the sound now. You know, these, for lack of a better word, not metal, but rock acts are doubling, having huge, lush beds of guitar playback wise underneath. So who would have thought that that's all it? So almost you're going to run into it. Learn how to deal with it. I hope that you got a couple of things out of what we were talking about. So anyway, thanks for coming, guys. We sure do appreciate it. Tell your friends, make sure you subscribe button down here, push that button. We appreciate it, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
See you, everybody.